there was a large independent congressionally mandated committee called the RAC, the Research Something Council. And they found that there was a causal relationship. These were world-class scientists. A causal relationship, this was in 2004, causal relationship between the exposure to neurotoxins and this phenomenon, which is now called Gulf War illness. For years, it was called Gulf War syndrome, which is, not much, supposedly. Now it's graduated to an illness, but they still have no cure for it. They still have inadequate compensation for people who suffer from it. And what caused it were chemicals of a single class called anticholinergic agents. And these are powerful neurotoxins that can go through the blood-brain barrier that is a membrane there to protect the central nervous system from, I sound like a doctor's wife, right? Central nervous system from pathogens. But these can go through it. And so they were exposed. The three things that the committee pointed to were over dousing of insecticides. Small surprise because, of course, Bayer and all these companies are behind it and they produce them. And you have the other side of the chemical of the farm company is the chemical company that does that sort of stuff. And sometimes some of them were the same company. And then there was an anti-nerve gas prophylactic pill that was experimental, and so not approved. It had been used in a very small dose for something else. But soldiers were told they'd be court-martialed if they didn't take it. And some of them felt sick instantly. So you had the insecticide, you had this unapproved medicine, and you also had sarin, because we bombed a facility where sarin was known to be, it seems. We sent it over, and I guess in Kayamisi, and there supposedly people knew it was there. Anyway, we bombed it, and the plumes went far and wide to Saudi Arabia. And so people who were never in Iraq seem to have been impacted by that. So what happened with that is these soldiers came home and they were suffering from every kind of disease. They had, because it's the central nervous system, it can affect every system. And so they had, usual stuff like you would with neurotoxins of, brain stuff and forgetting and concentration and moods. But they also had all kinds of kidney disorders and infertility and renal cancers and brain cancers and ALS and MS and kind of almost anything you can think of. And many of them just suffer from profound pain, also fibromyalgia. So,
and there was an attempt, right, to dismiss these as like psychosomatic things, right?
So, So since finally they accepted that PTSD was a disease from Vietnam, but now they pushed everything as PTSD.
Right. But I mean, that makes sense because PTSD is not a physiological, it's physiological, but it's from a trauma, right? It's from psychological trauma. It's not like chemicals the way that this was.
Yeah, right. But it also was from, some of the PTSD was also from some of the, like the Agent Orange stuff. It made people crazy too.
Right.
So,
by the way, can you show that comment again? Sorry, Nick. On the home front, Desert Storm was very popular. Tops even made trading cards. WWF's Hulk Hogan would wrestle Saddam lookalikes. No neg movies like Nam. No neg.
Like Vietnam.
Oh, no negative movies about it? Right, it's true. No. Wait. Three Kings. That was great. George. Was that first? Yeah, Clooney. Was that the first Gulf War or the second one? It was. That was a pretty, That
was an amazing film, but didn't go anywhere. Yeah. So then not only did they get sick, but they came home and got their wives sick, the male soldiers, and there was predominantly male, and got their wives sick with something called burning semen. And then there was a large representation of birth defects, large manifestation of birth defects. And they were really horrendous, some of them, with, I can't remember what it's called. It has gold.
Like with terrible stuff.
Gold far, like limbs in the wrong place, and
the birth defects you're talking.
Yeah, arms coming out of chests, and brain disease and heart valve disease, and at a higher level than a non-exposed population.
Right.
So that was horrendous. But what's also amazing about this war, and underappreciated, and why it's so loved, is that it also was the birth of Al-Qaeda as we came to know it in 2001. Because, of course, bin Laden, who was a hero of the Saudis and Islam in the Afghanistan war with the Soviet Union.
Right.
So he came back, a big hero, but they hadn't done any serious bombing or anything yet. So when we went into Saudi Arabia, we used that as the staging ground for the war, and that was really sullying the holiest sites of Islam. And he left. He was horrified. He was horrified by how many Iraqis had been murdered, how Iraq had been devastated. It was an outrage that infidels were coming in and destroying a Muslim state, Muslim lives. And so he left. He went into exile, and he went to Sudan, and he gathered his forces and trained his people, and he surfaced again. And when he surfaced in 96 and 98, I guess he was thrown out of Sudan. So the fatwa that he issued, let me just find it, because it's not...
Oh, like his manifesto? We were talking about why we were talking about the other day, I was Ron Nicalic, we were talking about how the how symbolic and important galvanizing the cause of Palestinians are. And it's like when you read Osama bin Laden's thing, where's the lie? When it comes to Palestinians, that's it. Not where's the lie in general, yeah. But no, the point is that that was and he was absolutely sickened by our support of Israel and its treatment of the Palestinians. Right. So what's often quoted is he says, and it starts with some very beautiful, flowing, but very kind of militant. I got canceled.
Passage from the Quran, but then he says he calls it's an individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible to kill Americans and their allies, civilians and military. It's an individual duty. But then he adds, and this is not usually quoted, in order to liberate the Al-Aqsa mosques and the Holy Mosque, which is Mecca, from their grip, and in order for their armies to move out of all the lands of Islam, defeated and unable to threaten any Muslim. So it was a very particular occasion, and he actually talked in the same manifesto.
I call it manifesto.
Now I'll call it manifesto. The same wah-wah. Come here, boo-boo. He talked about the 100,000 killed and the devastation of Palestine. So it was not just a maniac's
not just religious fundamentalism in a vacuum.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
So nobody really
not that everyone, obviously, who has grievances around Palestine becomes Osama bin Laden. But if we're curious about some of them, yeah.
Right. So anyway, all that has been hidden. The Gulf War illness is still, it's 30 years later, and they're not where they should be. And for years, they just stonewalled them. And, people were, of course, like so many vets, living on the street and mentally ill and also profoundly physically ill. I want to talk a little about the mental illness, though, because one of the things that's so horrible about this war and again doesn't get talked about is the aftermath in terms of massacres, mass killings, and murderous intent. And it's hard to tease out the environmental stuff from the biological stuff, but we do have screenings. Film of people's brains. Who committed these things? Like, do you remember the Beltway sniper?
Yeah. What was his name?
John Muhammad.
Yeah.
He had another name. His name was what was his name?
Let me try to pull it up.
I can't remember. But anyway,
John Allen Muhammad.
John Allen Muhammad.
Yeah, maybe his name was just John Allen. But anyway, he was normal. He was happy. His second wife, wrote a book about him before she ran away from him because she was afraid for her life. But he went on the spree and he kidnapped this young kid who now is spending life in prison.
So awful.
Who did nothing but be kidnapped, but you have these righteous people in government saying, that's just no excuse.
Right.
Do you feel like the quickness of, how sort of quick the ground war was in the Gulf War? Do you feel like that sort of like influenced the belief in the second Iraq War that we were just going to do this shock and awe and be in and out of there?
Yeah, it was definitely the prelude. I mean, they were trying out everything and showing you how war could be done.
Right.
It's also the beginning of that kind of video game. I mean, it really was a shift in every way in military culture and in mass culture.
And it made it easier, right? I mean, there was less skepticism. Not that we're a very war skeptical country, but it made people less skeptical maybe than they would have otherwise been because it was like a part two.
Those first days of the second Iraq War, I even am remembering now, and I'm like reminded because you talked about those kind of night vision video gamey images. I'm like, the first days of the second Iraq War were directly a sequel. It was just those like night vision images of like big, blooms of light and explosion. I feel like it almost looked like a movie sequel or something.
Right. Yeah, and they initiated a lot of these weapons, including the cluster bombs, which are bombs within bombs, and their damage just goes far and wide. Another thing about this war, which relates to the mass murders, is the highway of death, and that was on the watch of Barry McCaffrey, General McCaffrey, who we see often on MSNBC, giving his wise counsel. He actually disagreed with his superior and insisted, although there was a ceasefire already brokered by the Soviets and the UN, and we had agreed to start moving the troops out. And the troops were moving out. I mean, the Iraqis had agreed to move the troops out, and the troops were moving out when McCaffrey decided to cordon off 5 miles of a 6-lane highway and then another smaller highway a bit off of that. That it was a highway going from Kuwait to Basra and other parts of Iraq. And the Iraqis, this was the Iraqi army, Republican army, their tanks had their guns reversed, so they were clearly surrendered. Mm-hmm. And they blocked it off, the disabled vehicles in the front and in the back, and for 10 hours straight, they just bombed them.
Oh my God. And
that was a horrendous image. That was the 26th and 27th of February in 1991, and then Bush, quickly agreed to formally end the war. And on March 10th, this week, it will be 30 years that we actually began to move the troops out, but they never really left.
Right.
Look,
Because they
like you said, we never ended the war officially, right? In the eyes of Congress and all that.
No, yeah, and we never took our troops out.
Right.
The troops remained in Saudi Arabia, sullying the Holy Land and using it as an opportunity to do whatever needed to be done
Wow.
in the area. So that was, and there was a lot of, bad feeling among the Arabs about them doing that. But there were other mass. But let me talk about Timothy McVeigh, a very sweet boy.
Wait, by the way, Mom, I want to know where. Let me talk about Timothy McVeigh, a very sweet boy.
A very sweet boy.
You should
That's
write
my
that
next
as a
book.
novel. Yeah, but
That's my next book.
This,
Timothy
guys, everyone, she would never do this, but everyone go on. Where should they buy it? I don't want to push Amazon.
I don't know, Barnes and Noble.
There was a time when that was bad too. Nora Eisenberg's books. Make sure you get this one, and make sure you buy When You Come Home, which is about Gulf War syndrome. It's about 3 generations of war and PTSD, and one of them, it's Vietnam and Gulf War.